Hi, this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with Cynthia Dill and Dill and Nemitz, our Sunday columnists, and we're looking at the week gone by and the week ahead. But anybody read the Hillary Clinton book?
Dead silence.
No, me either.
Well, you don't have
I hear
to,
if you're
right?
gonna read a book.
Who cares what Hillary has to say? Isn't it more about what people have to say about her?
Correct.
That
That's
counts.
I thought that was fascinating. Is sort of the response, what people's response tells you about them. I mean, what was your take on that?
Well, I have not read the book, but I have read excerpts of the book, and I think the reaction to it is just evidence that she apparently needs permission from a certain group of people to speak, and that they get outraged that she has the gall to actually say what's on her mind about the biggest thing that's on everybody's mind. I mean, she was there front and center running against Donald Trump. People are trying to unpack and debrief the 2016 election, and yet she had the front row seat and has something to say about it. And yet there's just swaths of people who feel that it's not good and that she should just shut up. And I think it's just an interesting commentary on the state of politics in America. I mean, people still to this day, I think, don't give her the credit that she deserves as having an opinion that's worth listening to. And so I think it's good that she wrote the book. I think there's been people like James Fallow at The Atlantic who's come out and said, oh, it's actually a really good book, as if there's some surprise. And I think the Bernie
Well, it is pretty
Bros,
surprising that a politician right off an election would write an interesting book. Usually, I mean, they're preparing for the next race, right?
Right.
And this is unusual.
I think, though, with Hillary Clinton, you have to know that she knows that unless she gets out front, someone else is going to write the book. Amy Chozick today tweeted that her book about, and she was the chief reporter for the New York Times on Hillary's campaign. Her book has just been presented to the editors. So I think Hillary was wise to, get it out there from her perspective what happened, and not let others recreate another chapter in her life.
Bill, you want to hear what she?
Well, I'm not rushing out to buy the book right now, but I think that there's everything about her, everything about this race has to be viewed through the prism of the last election, which is like no election we've, in our lifetime, ever had. So what's difficult is trying to tease out in the reaction to her book how much of this is people with their fingers in their ears and their eyes closed saying, I just want it all to go away. I mean, still kind of reliving, in their view, what might have been the trauma of the election. And along comes Hillary, which, as you rightfully point out, Cynthia, has a lot to say, hasn't been saying a lot since it happened, and is offering her first take on what it was like to be in her seat and what she's running into. I think some of it, can be laid to kind of the underlying sexism that plagued her whole campaign. And I think a lot of it can also be pointed toward the trauma that people felt last fall. And yes, part of them wants to go back and relitigate the election, but at the same time, another part of them doesn't. And they just want it all to go away.
Yeah, that I think was part of the reaction. It's just like, I don't want to think about that again. I heard a long interview with her, and she had two things that I thought were really interesting. And one was she talked about the kind of media coverage that she got and throughout the campaign, and the kind that Trump got, and the way that I think she thought most people thought he was going to lose. So they treated him differently than you would treat a candidate who really had a chance of winning. And the amount of time spent discussing actual issues was like tiny, it was something like 18 minutes. It had been 1,000 minutes in 2008, and her kind of take on this was, this is the news media is going to have to really figure out how they're going to handle this. And when I heard that, I thought, I think we're all going to have to learn how to live in an environment where somebody screaming gets all the attention. How are we gonna deal with that? I don't mean how are we as a news media, how are we as Americans in a democracy going to deal with a media world where there's 10 million claims on your attention all the time, and it really takes a lot to get through, and it's not a 10-point plan about how you're going to transition to universal health care.
Well, I think I read the same articles about the lack of media coverage on policy issues and the focus on Hillary's email. And I mean, as a supporter of Hillary, I was every day just looking for articles about something other than her email, and was just so disgusted that Donald Trump got all the free media, that that somehow his every word he uttered was on the television all the time, whereas she would be giving speeches and they wouldn't be covered. So I think she's right to point out that the media is responsible in part for the election result, because I think most people would agree that it is. And I think she's right she took personal responsibility. She said, I take personal responsibility for all the decisions that I made in the campaign. But what she's not willing to do is take responsibility for Jim Comey, coming out and 11 days before the election, reopening investigation, and also not opening up an investigation against Trump. So I think it's, she doesn't need permission to write the book. I think it sounds to me like it's a good book that's worth the read. And to the people who say she should just shut up, I think like they need to look in the mirror and say, well, why is that your reaction? Mm-hmm. Like, why do you feel entitled to cast judgment on someone writing a book? I mean, you look like people write books every day. I mean, she's the most accomplished female politician in the history of the world. And she wrote a book about an election that we're still trying to understand. I don't know. I
think that's where a lot of the misogyny of the election comes in. I mean, that didn't stop. And if anything, I think that's gone on unabated since the election. And so for her to speak, to stand up and speak right now is, she's going to get that reaction. The one thing about the book that I found fascinating was when she said that it was the debate when Trump was patrolling behind her while she spoke, and she wrote something to the effect that I should have turned around and told him to back off, you creep, give me some space. And I'm not sure she went through the long mental thought process that she describes on the spot that night at the debate, but it does make me wonder what would have happened, because I think all of America felt uncomfortable during those moments. What would have happened if she had turned around and said, back off? You hear from race to race about how sometimes these things turn on these unlikely but kind of seminal moments. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if that might have been one where she finally pushed back.
I know, but except for the fact that going into the debates, they were very close in the polls, and it was after the debates that she pulled ahead substantially, because people watching the debate saw oh my goodness, here's a woman who knows what she's talking about, and here's a total,
And that would have been an emotional reaction.
Yeah, it might have just.
Right. I'm pretty sure she would have gotten hammered for doing that, and I think the thing that we have to reevaluate after seeing Trump, and I guess in Maine, LePage too, is getting hammered is not necessarily the worst thing in the world if it gets a lot of energy and attention.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But the other thing I wanted to bring up and I think it has an implication here in Maine, is the freedom with which she goes after Bernie Sanders by name and Bernie Sanders disloyal Democrats. I heard a long interview with her, and she was kind of given this softball question about, what do we do? There's divisions in the party. Is it a question of policy, or is it messaging? What do we do going forward, and to bring people together? And she went after Sanders by name, and said that he had kind of boxed her out, and that that people had attacked her for things that later damaged her reputation in a way that hurt her in the general election, and that they were not as supportive of her as she had been for Barack Obama. Things that have been reported before. Things that you don't hear candidates saying.
To me, going after is a little bit too dramatic. I mean, what she said was, which is what a lot of people think, is that Bernie Sanders isn't a Democrat, and he didn't go into the race as a Democrat, and he didn't go in insisting that a Democrat take the White House. He went in to disrupt the Democratic Party. And I think she's okay for saying that, she's proud to be a Democrat. She identifies, the big achievements of the Democratic Party, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, peace. She even, I guess, gave credit to Jimmy Carter for bringing peace between Israel and Egypt. So I think I'm glad that she has called Bernie Sanders out for the simple proposition that if you want to be a party nominee, there's nothing wrong with expecting that you would support the party.
Yeah, but isn't it a problem to have a party where the most compelling person who's got the biggest policy agenda is
not on the ticket.
Not a member? He's not even a member of the party.
That's the problem she was pointing out.
I know. I got
yeah.
it.
But But look at the traction he got. Is what you're saying.
Yeah. And look.
Yeah.
At, I mean,
in Maine, he lost the primary. So I think this goes back to, though, when women lose elections, the expectation from society is that they're just going to go away. When men lose, it's often like they're just kind of given a bigger platform. Let me just Troy Jackson. When he lost the primary to Emily Kane, all of a sudden he's like a hero. Elliot Cutler loses. He got less votes than I did. But when he loses the race, somehow you sort of think, oh, well, we still want to hear what he has to say because he's such just interesting guy.
Okay, so we need to, I know, I hear what you're saying. But I think it's a problem. It's a structural problem for the party nationally. It's a problem for the party in Maine, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt.
There was a lot of energy around Bernie.
Right. The question isn't so much, will Hillary and Bernie ever have their Kumbaya moment? The question is, what are the Democrats here in Maine and nationally going to do to corral that energy and bring it into the fold in a way that can achieve some kind of success in the upcoming cycle? Right now, that schism is as apparent as ever, and it's not going to do either side any good, much like the Republicans. They're facing the same problem. I mean, you have your established Republicans, and then you got those other folks.
Yeah.
And both parties are facing this fundamental challenge right now, and that is that all of the energy is outside what is traditionally viewed as the core of the party. And how do they bring that energy in without giving away the farm and without giving up all their long-standing principles and beliefs in what they stand for? But it's continuing the war of words between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders is going to achieve nothing.
I guess if it was in fact a war of words, I would be opposed to it. But to me, just talking about it, I don't think we have to stop saying that there is a real rift in Democratic circles around what the party wants to embrace. If it does want to, try to broaden the center to include some of the moderate Republicans to change the dynamic of the party, or are we supposed to shift more to the left? Now, the left I think is in large part benefits from having Bernie Sanders on the face of their cause because he's a likable guy and they did a really good job branding him. And so unlike the right, that I think sometimes the right extremes, there's a fringe person on the face of it, and so it's not given as much credence. Right. But right now, people use Bernie Sanders as an excuse for saying some pretty whacked out things.
Mm-hmm. Can you describe the rift in the party without using the words Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think both. When it comes to ideas around trade, I mean, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and I would say a lot of established Republicans.
You use the Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so, I'm just saying, okay. When it comes to the trade issues, okay, I was never a Democrat that believed that we should not engage in the world in trade agreements. I supported the United States joining the Pacific Trade. So I think a difference among Democrats is whether or not we're going to be at the table negotiating trade agreements or we're going to walk away. I think that's a big difference. I think the reality around single-payer healthcare is another one that, sure, it's fun to talk about single-payer, but the price tag is too high for, I think, for the United States to stomach right now, and so there has to be Plan B. I mean, Bernie Sanders' idea of, health insurance is the price tag. It would raise taxes so much that it just, I think a lot of people accept that there's less than that. That's a good way to approach reform. So those are a couple examples. I think
that's two beeps for you. You said Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well.
But you know what I'm saying? So is it, because what you're describing is not so much, with single payer, I think it's not really a policy difference. It's more like how do you get there? I think if you ask Hillary Clinton, if she had a magic wand, I don't know, I used her name, but she had a magic wand and could create a healthcare system, it would be, some kind of universal healthcare system, maybe single payer. But her way of getting there was through a number of, different smaller steps. And she came around on trade too. So, she came around to the other side on trade. She was just as against the TPP as anybody. But nobody believed her. I guess that maybe that.
Right.
That's
well,
it. What do you think, Phil? How would you describe what are the wings of the Democratic Party now?
Well, I think they are. I can't use their name.
Yeah. Well, the little guy with the glasses. Oh, he's not that little, actually. He's very tall. He just looks little on TV.
Well, I think it really comes down to people who have been very much engaged in the political process for a long time, and by that I mean caucuses, and I mean door knocks, and I mean all those things that we traditionally associate with grassroots politicking. And then at the same time, on the other hand, we have a group of people who are relative neophytes when it comes to the political process and come into it seething mad about all kinds of things and want fairly instantaneous results, and perhaps might be a little bit naive about how one goes about achieving those results in our system. But as I said earlier, this is where the energy is. Yeah. And the question is for anybody who's trying to put together any kind of a base these days is, how do you capture that energy and at the same time impress upon these people that all of their wildest dreams are not going to be achieved overnight? Again, to draw the parallel with the Trump base, they're all burning up their "Make America Great Again" hats right now because he changed his course on DACA. Part of the problem with these newcomers to the process is they aren't that well educated when it comes to how the system works. And they think that all you got to do is show up, and things are going to change, and that's not how it works. So I think it's not so much. It is ideology to some extent, but I also think it's how long people have been engaged separates one group from the other.
So if you're running for governor, say, how much effort do you put in trying to corral that energy if there's a chance that they're just going to fade away?
Well, yeah, the youth vote.
They're not usual primary voters.
You mean they're not going to show up and vote? Is that what you mean? Because that's really all you're trying to get them to do.
Yeah. Well, you maybe get them to work, volunteer and stuff. But is there a way to capture that kind of enthusiasm?
I think that it's the person who can, regardless of where you are on the spectrum, can look out and instill in people that sense that, and this is not going to sound terribly trite and cliched, but it's still true. This is the person who cares about me. This is the person who understands my problems. This is the person who's going to, that I'm going to fall in behind. And that it's really the age-old secret to successful politicking. And the problem is right now, I don't see a lot of people out there who can appeal to that across-the-board instinct, that concern that people have.
I don't know. I wish it was the old-fashioned metric and standards applied, but I do think in this day and age, and I'm thinking about what George Mitchell said recently, that with this influx of dark money
right,
and the media problems around fake news, that it's a different ball game. It's just a different ball game altogether. And so that's why, just very briefly, segue back into the benefit of having a book by somebody who is up close and personal, is that I think the more we know about this, the better, because people who go through this election process come out with a far greater understanding of what really matters.
It's educational.
Yeah, it really is.
And you're right. I agree wholeheartedly. It's not only an uphill fight right now, but it's an uphill fight and the hill is greased.
Yeah.
And I think that you can't overstate the impact that this so-called dark money and some of these very highfalutin sounding groups are having on basically telling people what they're going to think and believe without them actually knowing it's happening. And I find that very chilling.
Wow, I'm chilled. My big question is constantly is was that a one-off? Is Donald Trump like a unique figure, and we're never going to see anything quite like that again, or is this just the way it's going to be now, and how are we going to adapt to that? One of the interesting things that's happened in the last couple of weeks is his sudden willingness to negotiate with members of Congress, Democratic members of Congress, and there's some speculation that this is the real Donald Trump. He's really a deal maker. There's other people who say he doesn't really actually believe in anything, so it's really easy for him to switch, switch teams.
Yeah, I think both things are true.
But so what do you make of this? Good, bad?
Absolutely good for the country. Absolutely. It's the best thing. I mean, people have been waiting for the gridlock to kind of get broken up, and Donald Trump gave the Republicans plenty of opportunities to do something around repealing Obamacare. They failed. I mean, the only thing they've done is put Neil Gorsuch on the bench. Other than that, they've done nothing to help him. And I think it was brilliant for him brilliant might be too strong of a word, but I thought it was very smart to announce that DACA had 6 months. The executive order that President Obama had implemented because Congress was gridlocked and could not act, because that just puts pressure on Republicans because they're in control to do something, and the failure by Republicans to do something to address the immigration issue, or if the Republicans on the Republican watch, if these 800,000 young people get sent to Guatemala, going into the next election is going to be very precarious for Republicans. But also, I think what we saw was the negotiating strength of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and people, these new neophytes that you just talked about, who would label them establishment and they've got to go. These are people. Nancy Pelosi brought Obamacare over the finish line. She's an accomplished politician. She knows how to get things done. Chuck Schumer has negotiated his way to be the assistant, leader in the United States Senate. I think this triangulation of finding issues that divide the Republican Party and making a deal with Donald Trump, it's a whole new world for politics, and it's great.
I had a daydream fantasy the other day.
Are you sure you want to share this?
And Trump, he's now, somewhat aligning himself with the Democrats. And of course, another thing you're hearing with his base is it really doesn't matter what he does or says. With Trump, come hell or high water. So he aligns himself with the Democrats. He starts getting things done. And lo and behold, he brings his base along with him. And all of a sudden, what do we have? Harmony? We have people agreeing. And the only people on the outside, I suppose, are Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. But if his base is so easily led around simply by virtue of what he says and does, think of the possibilities here. That he could actually cut significant deals with the Democrats on the Hill, and the same people who elected him would be standing up and cheering because he's finally getting something done.
Right. And the fact that he brought Heidi Heitkamp on stage and in one, he's bringing Democratic senators who are up for re-election in states that he won along with him for press events. I mean, that's unheard of. I mean, to give the presidential stamp of approval to a Democratic Senate candidate. And I mean, I'm sure Mitch McConnell, he's got his foot on the throats of Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan right now, saying, look, guys, I could care less. I'm not going to run again. I know that's all you care about is your next election. I'm going to get something done. And I'm not saying we should trust him or admire him or worship him. I'm just saying that I'm glad that Trump is taking this turn and negotiating with Democrats. And it's one of the reasons why in the Republican primary, I was actually more supportive of Donald Trump than Ted Cruz, because Ted Cruz struck me as the kind of guy who would just become entrenched, right, and we'd have the same partisan reaction to everything. He and the Republicans would just be in lockstep, marching what I consider to be against all of what I believe in. So I'm actually
I don't think Mitch McConnell he might have his foot on Mitch McConnell's throat, but I think it's too soon to say that he's dead.
No, he's not dead.
And he has a lot of power in terms of no bill gets voted on. Right, he sets the agenda in the Senate. You just can't. Right. Merrick Garland is a classic example. Right, he can't make a deal without him.
Right.
And he apparently claims that he wrote some language into the debt ceiling bill that allows him to move some money around so that next time in 3 months when it comes up again, they won't be coupled, the budget and the we won't be looking at a government shutdown and a debt ceiling crisis at the same moment. So he's kind of maneuvered out of that. And I think he came one vote short of repeal and replace Obamacare. And there's word out today that the governor of Arizona has gotten behind this horrendous Cassidy. What's the guy from South Carolina?
Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham.
Yeah.
If that means John McCain and Jeff Flake are going to vote for it, then we're not talking about how they failed to pass health care.
Yeah, unless Trump vetoes it.
Right. I mean, the balance is upset.
Who
here.
knows?
I think
they're running
everything's
out of
up in
time.
the air.
Exactly, Greg. They're running out of time. The election's coming, and McConnell is just probably more cognizant of that than anyone, since it's a thin majority in the Senate that he's trying to hang on to. I think as we look back on this year, if things keep going in the direction they are, the seminal moment, it's very often it's captured with a picture. It's going to be that picture of Chuck Schumer sitting in the White House with that big, eating grin on his face. I think that's the moment where the dynamic shifted. And you're right, it doesn't strip McConnell of anywhere near all his power, but it puts tremendous pressure on him going into the midterm election to start cutting deals. And that's something that he was loath to do before now.
Well, he's always been a deal cutter.
I'm talking about the latter half of the Obama administration.
No, I think if you think about a key element of that last election, I know people say they don't want to talk about it, but it was the Republicans voting for Trump in the same numbers that they voted for Mitt Romney, and the Supreme Court opening really brought that home. A lot of people who could not stand Trump voted for him because they wanted the Republicans to have the Supreme Court choice.
Well, and I mean, the other thing is just that such the quirkiest thing is the fact that the loser got 3 million more votes than the winner. Yeah. I mean, there's just so many, and then the Comey thing and the Russian thing and the fake news thing. So there's all this constellation of odd things happening on top of having this extremely odd Republican candidate. Just made the election, I think, fascinating. But and obviously, looking forward, how it's going to impact the primaries. If people are in the Republican side of things and the Democratic side of things, if they are going to fall naturally into what has been typically the Bernie Clinton, dynamic, if they're for Trump or against Trump, or if it's now because of this deal making. If maybe we can talk more about policy, maybe we can talk more about candidates supporting DACA or repealing and replacing Obamacare, as opposed to this lockstep partisan kind of framework of I'm the most conservative or I'm the most progressive.
Make America great again.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I have a feeling that Chuck Schumer photo might be like the selfie video of the guy in Yankee Stadium who filmed himself when Aroldis Chapman was striking out the Red Sox and winning the game, and said Devers hits the home run, and he's like, his jaw falls. So I think we might be looking back on that.
We'll see. I think it was we have been in interesting times for a long time, but right now, I think it is the most interesting because things are changing, and they're changing under our feet, and nobody really knows where this is going. He could end this alliance with the Democrats tomorrow, or it could become the defining move of his presidency. Who knows?
Yeah,
Nobody knows.
Yeah, I think the organization or the entity to watch is this Freedom Caucus, because they're the ones that Trump needed to get elected, and everyone knows is the problem in the House of Representatives. The reason why we can't get anything done is because this Freedom Caucus holds this, numerical sway. And I think the fact that Trump realized, these guys are nuts, and I'm not going to get anything done to tax reform, repealing Obamacare, DACA, unless, we do something about this Freedom Caucus. I'm hoping that they become the focus and perhaps become vulnerable.
Well, next week we'll know more. So I think
Ain't that always the case?
Yeah.
We can point out where we were right. I think that's it for today. Thanks.
Have a great week.
Thanks.
This is a Press Herald podcast. You can hear past episodes at pressherald.com/podcasts. You can subscribe on iTunes, on Android devices, and stream on Stitcher. Please email comments and questions to letterstotheeditor@pressherald.com. Thank you for listening.